Okay, and I think we're live. 안녕하세요, Nicola입니다. For those new here, my name's Nikki. Mostly you'll find me here on YouTube talking about books, writing and editing. However, you may not know I also study several languages, foreign languages. So having been inspired both by seeing some other language learning YouTubers here and also the fact that in recent months I've kind of really been getting back into my language studies in a more serious way, I thought it would be fun to do a series of videos in which I talk about my language learning. I'll offer a few tips on different ways you can study languages, find resources, choose a language, talk about some of the common pitfalls in language learning. And I'll also take you through my language learning journey in the 8 languages that I've been studying. So I've got at least 18 videos planned, and the aim is to release one a month around the middle of the month each time. So this is the very first video. As its intro, I just thought I'd talk a bit about why I got into languages and what I wanted to do with this series. And to the end, I'm actually going to complete the Polyglot Language Tag, which I found on Lindy Boats's YouTube channel, and I've got a link to that in the description below. And yeah, I think I'm probably going to answer those questions first, and then if there's just anything else I want to add that I haven't talked about, I'll pop that at the end. I'm still trialing. For those of you who watch my end of the month reading and TV film wrap-ups, you know I bought some new tech last month. I've got a new webcam and a new mic, and I'm still kind of getting used to them. When I did play back the live streams I did for the end of June, I noticed there was a little bit of feedback on the microphone. So what I've tried to do is I checked the volume settings and it was quite high. So I've moved that down quite a bit and I'm sitting slightly further away from it, which I'm hoping is going to solve the issues, but we'll see how the quality goes in this one. And please just bear with me. It might just take me a few videos just to find the optimum placement and levels and things like that. So to kick off anyway with the Polyglot Language Tag, I've got the questions here in front of me, so we'll run through them. Let me move this banner out the way now. Okay. So question number 1, what do you consider to be your native language? For me, it's English. If you don't know, I was born in England, in the UK, in Kent, in the southeast. And these days, I live in Australia, in Adelaide, South Australia. So definitely grew up speaking English, and everywhere I've lived has also been English-speaking country. 2, what was your first language learning experience? For me, this would be in high school. We tend not to learn foreign languages until high school in England. There are exceptions. You find the occasional primary school that might do an extracurricular bit of French or something, but for the most part, it's a high school subject. The first language I took at high school was German, and I did that from year 7. We start high school in year 7 in England, and did that through for 5 years, through the compulsory high school years. The next one I took up after that was French. In fact, I've just noticed I'm starting to answer the third question, so maybe I'll read that out and then I'll continue the discussion. So the third question is, what languages have you studied and why did you start them? So going back, German, it was compulsory at my high school. They actually taught 2 foreign languages at my high school, which was a little bit unusual. We did French and German. Many high schools would only offer 1. However, I would note that my high school was a grammar school. If you don't know the English school system, everyone at age 11 takes the 11+ test. I don't know if it's still called that. It's going back a few years since I did it, but that's what it was called then. And you take that at the end of primary school before going to high school. However, the results don't stop you going to high school in any way. It was mainly just for banding. If there were different levels of maths class and things, they'd put you in one according to your score on the test. However, we also have grammar schools, which are still free education in England, but you have to take their own personal test to get into them on top of doing the 11+. So I went to a grammar school. Their test tends to be a little bit harder than the 11+, and they're a little bit more academically focused, whereas some high schools would push a bit more vocational style training, particularly these days with more IT stuff and that. We didn't do any IT essentially at my grammar school. I mean, this is going back into the 90s, you know, so mid to late 90s. So Obviously, computers weren't as widely used as they are now. We're in the 2020s, but we really only had one or two classes ever in the whole 7 years I was at grammar school. So it was very much an academic focus, which is why they offered two foreign languages. So as I said, I started with German. I did German just on its own for the first year. In the second year, you then take up French or German, depending on which one you'd done first. So I carried on with both those languages through until GCSE level, which are exams you take at age 16. And then you get a choice of specialising for 2 years to do your A-levels, which are the sort of final 2 years of study before you go off to university. When I came to A-levels, I had an option. I knew I wanted to do English and music A-levels, and I could either do both French and German as A-levels, or I could do one of them, but do a 1 year sort of cram GCSE in Italian. And because I loved languages so much and was interested, I picked up Italian then and carried on with French. So I did French and Italian because I thought those two complemented each other more than staying with German, even though I still liked German. Went off to university and continued with French at university as well. And then went on and did a postgraduate diploma in translation, working mainly with French. At this point, I also was at an age where I could travel a bit on my own. And my pen pal in the Czech Republic invited me to go and stay with her. So I went over to Prague for a week. It was my first experience traveling solo, although I did meet up with her, obviously, when I got there. And I hadn't had a huge amount of foreign travel experience either, because at that point, my parents were still more keen on staying in England for holidays. I think we'd done one trip to Italy by then, and perhaps a trip to Paris, but that was all. So it was a bit of a change of culture for me. I really enjoyed it. I came to really appreciate the Czech language. I just loved the sound of it. And I came to enjoy Czech musicals. I was already a musical theatre fan. And the pen pal I was staying with was too. And so she took me to see several shows while I was there. I think we saw 3 or 4 things during the week. So I ended up buying the CDs and DVDs and things from those shows. And when I got back, I decided to teach myself Czech. So I started that. That would have been about 2000, 2001, I think. I have trouble remembering these days. I'm getting so old, I can't remember dates anymore. Following on from that, I didn't pick up any new languages for a little while until probably, I guess it must have been about 11 or 12 years ago, when I became a big fan of the actor Mads Mikkelsen while watching Hannibal. And I went back and started watching all his backlist of Danish movies, and started watching a lot of other Danish cinema because I found I really enjoyed it. And at that point, I started learning Danish too, again, teaching myself. And then once again, there was a small break, but I was also really fascinated by Viking culture and the old Icelandic sagas. So I started trying to learn Icelandic as well. And Icelandic's the one I've struggled with the most so far, as I will talk about more when I do a particular video on it. But it was mainly due to a lack of resources and lack of opportunity to practice. So it did drop off after a couple of years of doing it. I kind of let it go, and I'm only just now coming back into it. And then I had a bit of a break from any real major language learning. I tried to keep up the ones I already knew as much as possible, by writing to pen pals, watching foreign content, films and bits and pieces. But it was really just about 2 years ago now that I started Japanese. And that's because I developed an interest in anime and manga. And I thought it's been ages since I have learned a new language, and I really enjoy language learning. So I decided to give it a try. And 6 months after starting Japanese, I also started watching a ton of Korean drama on Netflix. So that was, at first I was like, I can't possibly start another language and I've only just started Japanese, but it happened. So I'm now learning Korean too. So the Japanese is completely self-taught. The Korean was self-taught initially, but I'm now also taking classes with King Sejong Institute for that. So I think that brings us to the end of 3. Gosh, that took a while. I will go into a lot more detail about each of the languages in future videos though, so watch out for that. Number 4, need a sip of tea though. How does your personality affect how you learn languages? I think I'm a very structured person, I would say. And when I started learning foreign languages in grammar school, the focus was very much on grammar. Compared to my sister who went to a standard high school, and she learned French, and that was very topic based. You kind of learn how to say a few sentences in the topic, they test you on it, and then that was it. You'd move on to another topic and never have to do it ever again. So she doesn't really speak any French, a few phrases, a few words. Whereas my school was very much learning the basics of the language, structure of sentences, how to conjugate verbs, and only then also talking vocab and phrases and things. And that's something that I've really carried through in all my language learning, I would say. I always, of course, you want to pick up a bit of vocab early on, but I always do put a very strong focus on grammar at the start, just to get an understanding of how the language works, how the sentences come together. And then from there, I'll build up on vocab and usage and things once I've kind of got the structure of the language in my mind. And that's definitely because I am one of those people that I write lists of lists, and everything's very formalized and planned out in general in my routine, like daily life. So that definitely comes through in my language learning. Number 5, do you prefer learning languages in a class or individually? I think there's pros and cons for each, and again, this is something I'll go into a bit more detail on in future videos. I think when I was first learning my first foreign languages, being in the class really helped, and being taught how to learn them, and being taught even just the explanation for different grammar points, which when we learn English, we just kind of learn English, we don't think about what's an object, what's a subject so much. I don't know if that's still the case, but it certainly wasn't the case when I was at school. That just wasn't covered at all in English classes. So all this terminology you kind of only learn for the first time when studying a foreign language. So I think not trying to do that on my own without any guidance in a first foreign language would have been really hard. These days, though, because I've done a few languages, I kind of know what things work for me, how I like to study. And in some senses, the classes can then hold you back. If you're someone who wants to be able to move at your own pace, you might find that the classes are a little bit too slow for you because others are taking longer to pick up on things that you've already gotten your head around. I'm taking these Korean classes at the moment, and I'd say it's a sort of 50-50 for me. There's part of me that sometimes, particularly in the first term, in the second term it's been better. In the first term, we spent 5 weeks learning the Korean alphabet, which I'd already learned a year before. So that was really, really boring for me, those first few lessons. The only thing that helped was the fact I hadn't had any pronunciation practice and speaking practice working on my own. So I was finally able just to make sure I was pronouncing the alphabet and the words and things correctly. But other than that, that first term felt quite a plod for me because I was already further advanced than what I was learning. However, for this second term that we're in at the moment, I'm finding it much better. I've still studied some of the stuff on my own already, but not all of it. And now that we're really getting into talking and being able to say sentences with the teacher, I'm finding that really worthwhile, because otherwise I get no speaking practice for Korean at all. I have a couple of friends on the Slowly app who I can write messages with in Korean, but nothing for speaking except maybe a 2-second visit to the Korean supermarket every now and again, and that's it. So it definitely has pros and cons, and I will go into those in, as I said, some future videos and talk about them in a bit more depth. Let's have a look. Number 6, what are your favorite language learning materials? This one for me is also going to be a bit of a mix. I mean, I always like to make sure I've got some good grammar guides, verb tables, dictionary, and all those kind of standard textbook type ones as reference material. After that, I used to use the Teach Yourself series quite a lot. I used that for Czech, Icelandic, and Danish when I first started those, before moving on to some other grammar books and things. I didn't use those, though, for Japanese and Korean. I actually tried Duolingo for the first time with those. And Duolingo has its problems. It's not perfect, but I did find it good enough to give me a bit of a start in both those languages and to set me on the right track. So apps definitely have their place. But I think it helps to have a variety of materials as well, so that if you just don't feel like a big grammar slog one day, you can do something a bit more lighthearted, like listening to a podcast or something like that, and you can suit it to your mood. And just keep that variety there to keep your motivation up. Again, I will give a bit more of a breakdown of materials I use for different languages as I talk about those languages in future videos. Number 7, how much time do you actively spend learning every day or week? It used to be very haphazard. If I got a letter from a pen pal that I had to write to in German or French or something, I'd be reading and writing, but then I might not do much for a little while. A few years ago, I started trying to play the news in German, French, and Italian. I found that was something I could do while I'm also doing family history research. And so when I was working on ancestry and like looking up records and making notes and things, I'd have those news playing in the background and listening for a bit of listening practice. Occasionally I'd pick up a book in one of the languages too, or watch a film, but it wasn't very structured for a few years after I moved here. Essentially, when I moved to Australia, a lot of things kind of went by the wayside, first because I didn't have all my stuff until I got it shipped a little while later, and just settling into a new life and a new routine and full-time work and things like that. These days though, particularly within the last few months, which is what's prompted this series and my plans for these vlogs, I've really started to get into it more. Firstly, when I started the Japanese and then the Korean. And then while studying those, I've become aware that some of my others are getting a bit rusty just through lack of use. So what I'm trying to do now is practice all of them every week, at least for a little bit. So Korean and Japanese, I do every single day. If it's a day when I'm in my office job, I work in an office part-time, then I will just do 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes of each on the bus, just doing some Duolingo or some Memrise, just something quick and easy just to do something. And then in the evenings, I'm still watching a huge amount of manga and Korean TV as well. And for the other languages, I'm trying to do at least one or occasionally 2 of them a day on the days when I'm at home. And I'll do between half an hour to an hour on them. What I do will vary. I'll try and do a little bit of listening at least and some grammar. But again, as I said earlier when I was talking about resources, it just depends how the mood takes me. And I'm still at the early stage of getting into this routine, so I haven't completely nailed down exactly what I do want to I can't speak what I want to do when yet. I am intending to do a sort of full grammar review of each language, just to quickly run through, verb tenses, noun declensions, and things like that. So I'm kind of working on that first and trying to say, like, this week over this week and next week I'll check all the past tense of all these 6 languages. Korean and Japanese I'm keeping completely separate still because they're the newest. But yeah, so it will vary. The very least I do 15 minutes to 20 minutes or so if I'm in my day job. If I'm having an editing working at home day, I will do, or if I'm just at home, I'll do about an hour on Korean and Japanese each, or 45 minutes at least, depending on my time, plus about an hour on at least one other language. If I need to fit 2 other languages, then I'll do sort of half hour, 45 minutes on each. So that's my routine at the moment. And as I said, I'm still kind of ironing that out and getting into it. So that may change a little bit. Number 8, what are your short-term and long-term language learning goals? I've probably covered this in part. My short-term goal is definitely just to boost my existing languages and just make sure I'm not getting too rusty. With the longer-term goal being to improve my fluency in all of them, and in particular the Japanese and Korean. I'd say at the moment my French and German are advanced. Most of the others are hovering around a sort of mid-intermediate level, except for 1 or 2 like the Icelandic and obviously the Japanese and Korean that are more beginner to early intermediate levels. So I think eventually I'd really like to get to a high intermediate level at least on all of those, while maintaining my advanced level in the French and German and continuing to improve on those. What is your favorite language? That is kind of like, asking a parent which is their favorite child, isn't it? It will vary depending on my mood. Like obviously the newest one I pick up is usually my favorite at that moment. I'd say at present Korean and Japanese probably about equally, but that's because they're the ones I'm most invested in at present as my newest ones. However, the reason I'm trying to pick up the Icelandic again is because I recently watched an Icelandic TV show on Netflix. And I was actually surprised that I wouldn't have been able to watch the entire thing without subtitles, but there were quite a few words that I was picking up and phrases that I remembered and things, even though I've not touched it for years. And that kind of gave me a bit of a boost to want to try it again, particularly when I looked around and found that there are a lot more online resources now than there were back when I did it before. So that's a few more opportunities for practice and comprehension and things. So at the moment, I'll say Japanese and Korean, but obviously it's a hard question to answer. Number 10, what is the next language you want to learn? Well, I think with 8 on the go at the moment, I've probably got my plate full. If I took on any more at the moment, I'd probably have like a nervous breakdown of worrying about fitting it all in. There's probably 2 that have been on my radar for a while that if I ever do a new one again, it will probably be one of these. The first is Russian. That's been on my sort of wish list for a little while. I do already have the Teach Yourself books and a dictionary and things for it, because we had a Russian choir who came to visit my choir in England a while back, and I just learnt a few phrases to say hello and we enjoyed your performance and things. So I have got some material to start me off if I decide to do it. And the grammar will probably flow quite nicely for me because it'll be similar to Czech, as will some of the vocab as well, I imagine. But I will have to learn another new alphabet. So it's definitely somewhere in the back of my mind to do it one day, but it's not going to be imminent. And the other one is Chinese. And this one is probably solely because I have a Chinese sister-in-law now. And when I tell people I'm learning Japanese and Korean and they find out I have a Chinese sister-in-law, they always go to me, why on earth are you learning Japanese and Korean and not Chinese when you've got someone to practice with? Which is obviously a very valid point. And I think the only thing is that I've watched an occasional Chinese film or TV show, but I'm not really that into them. Whereas I'm more motivated with the Japanese and Korean because I'm really consuming a lot of stuff in Japanese and Korean. Whereas the Chinese would be more just for the sake of my sister-in-law and the fact her parents are hoping to move here from China and they don't really speak English. So that would be a motivator for me to start. Maybe it could be a while yet before they get permission and are able to come. So when they do, I might want to be able to try and speak to them a bit, help them out. So I'm hoping, by that kind of time, I might be reasonably good at Japanese kanji, and so I'll be able to recognize some of the writing, which will be kind of half the step. But those are probably the 2 that I would do next, but I have no immediate plans to start either of them. And that brings us to the final question, which is, what advice can you give new language learners? This is a topic that I'm actually going to cover more extensively, well, substantially more extensive, if I can speak extensively, in future videos in this series. But for now, I'll just suffice to say that I think choosing the language that's right for you is a big, important first step. You have to be motivated, and motivation can come from a lot of different sources, but there needs to be some kind of motivation that will not only start you learning, but keep you learning. And the other advice, again, this is something I'll cover in more detail, but it's to find out how you like to learn and make sure you're doing the activities that are going to be most beneficial for you. The only issue these days with so much out there, so many resources, is you can become a little bit overwhelmed by them, and you've got so many resources that you're flitting from one to the other, and then you never really settle down and learn anything. So I'd just say, managing your resources and working out which ones are going to be the most beneficial for you. So that brings us to the end of the tag. And it's taken quite a while, actually. We're 24 minutes in. So I'll just wrap up with a few thoughts for the end of this video. I mean, why do I like learning languages, I suppose, is a big question. It's worth answering in this introductory vlog. And I think it has many aspects to me. I just love just the process, I guess, of language learning to begin with. That step of understanding the structure of their sentences, how a different language uses words, how it uses verbs, how it all comes together. And tied up in that is obviously an appreciation for the culture of that language, of that country and its people. And as I said, the kind of motivation of, you know, you consume stuff from that country, be it films or books, and you want to have a greater understanding of it. And just as a way also to get to know people around the world. I mean, English is so widely spoken that we can take it for granted, I think, these days, that we just assume everyone will understand us if we're speaking English. And I think it's really nice to make an effort to understand other countries and their cultures through their languages. Um, so yeah, I think all that's left to say today is maybe that I'll just mention a bit about what I've got planned for the coming weeks. So the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to do some general overview kind of videos in which I'll talk about how to approach language learning, how to choose languages, how to find resources, and then also some of the pitfalls and the difficulties you might face and how you could try and get yourself out of them. And then after I've done a few videos on that kind of material, I'm going to move on and look at each of my 8 languages in detail in an individual video. So I'll talk about in more depth how I started them, how I've studied them, what levels I'm at, and share any resources that I've found for them that I think are particularly useful and worth checking out. And then I'll wrap up after that with probably some content on some funny anecdotes of my foreign language fails and achievements. We should throw in some positive stuff too, but just some amusing stories about times when I haven't quite got it right, or when something's not quite come across the way I intended. And then I will do a couple of videos, probably one later this year and then one right at the end of the series, looking at my language study routine. So I'll look at how it's been during this year and what I've got planned for next year. And then towards the end of next year, I'll see how that new plan went and what I've got planned for 2023 it will be after that. So if any of you have any particular requests for content to do with language learning, pop them in the comments. And if it's something that I'm going to cover, I'll let you know that it's coming up, or I will try and incorporate it into a video, either one of the planned ones or an additional one for you. I'm going to end there for now, but I hope you will join me again. I'll be back in the middle of August around this time again, and I will be talking to you a bit more about choosing a language and how to go about language learning. I'll end there for now, but see you all again at the end of the month too for my book and TV and film wrap-ups for July. Bye for now, everyone.